You're watching Promethean Action Saturday night class for November 9th with Will Wirtz. Will worked closely with Lyndon LaRouche for, I think, 4 decades. And one of the things he worked on was the subject of, one of the principal things he worked on was the subject of tonight's class, forging a 4-power agreement for a new Bretton Woods and to end the danger of war. Just speaking for myself before Will starts, my name's Tony Pappert. I'm speaking to you from the Detroit area. We've come now to a branching point of world history, and the American people who have rallied to President Trump's leadership and returned him to the White House with an overwhelming mandate must now stand by him while he overcomes the opposition and the obstacles to his program. Too many simply stood by during his first administration as he was sabotaged, framed up, lied against, and in many cases, by members of his own administration. We can't make that mistake again. We must rally closely beside the Trump administration to achieve its goals with a full knowledge of what it is that must be achieved. And that's the purpose of tonight's class, and in general, our whole educational program. So with that, I'd like to give the floor to Will.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much. Well, in line with what you just said, I would point out that the words of the poet Shelley in his poem, The Mask of Anarchy, very much characterize how the American people responded to President Trump, and also what is required going forward. What he wrote in that, at the conclusion of that poem, was, "Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to the earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few." And in his essay in defense of poetry, Shelley also, I think, aptly describes the kind of period that we are living in right now. What he wrote there was, "The most unfailing herald, companion, and follower of the awakening of a great people to work a beneficial change in opinion or institution is poetry. At such periods, there is an accumulation of the power of communicating and receiving intense and impassioned conceptions respecting man and nature." So I think that the situation we're in right now is one in which there is great potential for the entertainment of even counterintuitive ideas, like Lyndon LaRouche's concept of a 4-power agreement between the United States, Russia, China, and India to finally defeat the British Empire and create a new Bretton Woods system based on American system principles of political economy. Could you put up the picture of Prometheus, please? Of course, this organization is called Promethean Action, but I want you to take a look at Prometheus. He was a mythical figure described by the Greek poet Aeschylus, among others. And what is unique about him is that he gave man hope, he gave man fire, he gave man knowledge, scientific knowledge, which the Olympian gods, the oligarchy, the equivalent of the Anglo-Dutch imperial oligarchs of today, back in an earlier period, wanted to deny to man. They wanted to keep him in slumber. They wanted to prevent him from exercising his creative capacities, because that was a threat to their system. And as a result, what Zeus, the head Olympian god, did was to punish Prometheus for his generous love of mankind by binding him on a rock and having an eagle go every night and eat his liver. Now, could you show the picture of the second picture of President Trump? And I think many people throughout the world have reacted to exactly how President Trump responded in this first assassination attempt. And the quality of mind that he exhibited in that moment, and the quality of mind which I think you can see in him, is of a Promethean nature. It's what also the German poet Friedrich Schiller described as the sublime. What Schiller said is that all things must. Man is the being who wills. The sublime state of mind is the state of mind of someone who, in the face of adversity, even of death, acts out of love, not out of a desire to achieve pleasure or avoid pain, but out of love for others. And that is exactly what we saw in President Trump at that moment. And that is a quality which we should all make an effort to express in our own lives. But I think it's a quality in President Trump which is certainly to the benefit not only of our own country, but also of the world, because we can expect that he is going to be, like Prometheus, a giver of fire, a bringer of fire. Fire meaning technology, but also fire meaning the desire to promote in every individual their God-given capacity for creativity, for creative intellect, and for love. Now, having said that, what I want to present is some conceptions, intense and impassioned conceptions respecting man and nature. The choice facing the nation and the world today, as it was during the election, is between two systems. The American system of political economy, which is supported by Donald Trump explicitly, and on the other side, the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. President Trump right now is going to begin to act to implement his campaign promises. You can read those in the Republican Party platform, and he has stated them throughout his campaign. So I'm not going to mention all of those promises, but I would just mention what I regard as some of the most important. He's going to act to prevent World War III. He's going to restore U.S. sovereignty while respecting the sovereignty of other nations. He's going to use protective tariffs to stop outsourcing and the deindustrialization of our nation and turn it into a manufacturing superpower once again. He's going to make America the dominant energy producer in the world. He's going to end the Green New Deal, withdraw from the Paris Climate Treaty. He's going to defend the US dollar as the international reserve currency, and certainly with collaboration, in collaboration with Elon Musk, among others, he's going to send American astronauts back to the moon and onward to Mars, something we haven't done since John F. Kennedy. Now, what I want to do in this class today is to discuss why the four-power agreement between the USA, Russia, China, and India to create a new Bretton Woods system using American system methods is necessary to achieve these very objectives, and finally to defeat our historic enemy, the Anglo-Dutch British Empire, which will do everything in its power to thwart President Trump's intentions, as they have done for the last number of years. And I also want to discuss why the BRICS are not an alternative due to their acceptance of the Malthusian Paris Climate Treaty, free trade policies of the World Trade Organization, and their insistence upon merely obtaining better representation in the boardrooms of the old Bretton Woods system, rather than replacing that system as a whole. Now, I think it's important to understand the difference between the American system and the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. Henry C. Carey was an advisor to the first Republican president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. And he said this about the difference between the American and the British system. Quote, "Two systems are before the world. One looks to the continuance of that bastard freedom of trade, which denies the principle of protection. The other, extending the area of legitimate free trade by establishment of perfect protection. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, and barbarism. The other to increasing the wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of action, and civilization. One looks to universal war, the other toward universal peace. One is the English system, the other we may be proud to call the American system. For it is the only one ever devised, the tendency of which was that of elevating while equalizing the condition of man throughout the world. Such is the true mission of the people of these United States." Now, back in August of 2018, at the time I was president of the Schiller Institute, a position which I resigned from the following year, I authored a letter to President Trump, President Putin, President Xi, and Prime Minister Modi, proposing the basis for a four-power agreement to create a new Bretton Woods system. This proposal was based upon the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche. And you can find a public version of that in chapter 12 of my book, Beware the British East India Company. Could you show that a picture of the book, Tony?
Yeah.
Also, see Lyndon LaRouche's book, The Four Powers, the preface of which is a speech I gave on September 7, 2018, on FDR, the Forgotten Man. This proposal for such a four-power agreement was not realized at the time, in part because of the COVID pandemic and because of the Russian hoax, which was designed to prevent President Trump from coming to any agreement with Russia in particular. With President Trump now reelected, now the time is finally to act on that proposal. Now, it should be clear that with President Trump's election, he will very quickly move to resolve the war in Ukraine. Peace will be restored in the Middle East based on the Abraham Accords. And it should also be noted that Trump previously also proposed a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis during his first term. However, for these efforts to succeed and to result in a durable peace, even beyond Trump's second term, the financial system which causes war must be replaced. The deep state is not purely domestic. It is part of an international Anglo-Dutch financial imperial system involving the old Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, World Trade Organization, the Paris Climate Treaty, and also the so-called independent central banks, such as the Federal Reserve in this country, the Bank of England, European Central Bank, among others. Now, this new system must be based upon mutual respect among sovereign nation states. I want to read from a speech that President Trump gave to the UN General Assembly on September 19, 2017. It's an extraordinary speech in terms of putting forward the conception of mutual respect for sovereign nation states, which is a precondition for world peace and economic development. He said at that time, "We have it in our power, should we so choose, to lift millions from poverty, to help our citizens realize their dreams, and to ensure that new generations of children are raised free from violence, hatred, and fear. This institution was founded, that is the UN, in the aftermath of two world wars to help shape this better future. It was based on the vision that diverse nations should cooperate to protect their sovereignty, preserve their security, and promote their prosperity. To overcome the perils of the present and to achieve the promise of the future, we must begin with the wisdom of the past. Our success depends on a coalition of strong and independent nations that embrace their sovereignty to promote security, prosperity, and peace for themselves and the world. We do not expect diverse countries to share the same cultures, traditions, or even systems of government, but we do expect all nations to uphold these two core sovereign duties: to respect the interests of their own people and the rights of every other sovereign nation. This is the beautiful vision of this institution, and this is the foundation of cooperation and success. And I would just point to a comment made by J.D. Vance the day after the election, speaking before the U.S. Senate. He said that the U.S. has built a foreign policy of hectoring and moralizing and lecturing countries that don't want anything to do with it. And so I think with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, we are going to move towards a policy of mutual respect among sovereign nation states. Could you put up the pictures of Hamilton, List, Friedrich List, and Henry C. Carey, please?
That's Hamilton, Friedrich List, Henry C. Carey.
Now, these are the economists who are most responsible for the development of the American system of political economy. And in his first term in office, President Trump was absolutely unique, probably since McKinley. And I mean, and ironically, Franklin Roosevelt, whose great paternal grandfather, Isaac Roosevelt, worked with Alexander Hamilton. President Trump is unique in explicitly advocating the American system. Let me quote from a number of speeches that he made in 2017. First one on March 15, 2017, in Willow Run, Michigan. Our great presidents from Washington to Jefferson to Jackson to Lincoln all understood that a great nation must protect its manufacturing, must protect itself from the outside. We must embrace a new economic model. Let's call it the American model. Under this system, we will reduce burdens on our companies and on our businesses. But in exchange, companies must hire and grow in America. They must hire and grow in our country. This is how we will succeed and grow together. American workers and American industry side by side. Nobody can beat us, because whether we are rich or poor, young or old, black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots. 5 days later, in Freedom Hall in Louisville, Kentucky, he said, our first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, was born right here in Kentucky. And the great 19th century American statesman, Henry Clay, represented Kentucky in the United States Congress. Henry Clay believed in what he called the American system and proposed tariffs to protect American industry and finance American infrastructure. Clay was a fierce advocate for American manufacturing. He said very strongly, free trade, which would throw wide open our ports to foreign production without duties, while theirs remain closed to us. Clay said that trade must be fair, equal, and reciprocal. For too long, our government has abandoned the American system. Finally, the next day on March 21st, Trump spoke in Washington, D.C., and he said, I have called this model the American model, and this is the system that our founders wanted. Our greatest American leaders all agreed that for America to be a strong nation, it must also be a great manufacturing nation. Republican platform of 1896, more than a century ago, stated that protection and reciprocity are twin measures of American policy and go hand in hand. Now, as part of, so you have here a commitment to making the United States a manufacturing superpower once again. The utilization of protectionism, of tariffs, to protect American labor, protect American industry, as opposed to the deindustrialization which we've suffered since especially since the 1970s. And the further aspect of what Trump is going to do is he's going to reject the Green New Deal, which is based upon a fraudulent theory, the idea of anthropogenic climate change, the idea that man induces climate change, when the reality is that climate change does occur, but it is brought about by solar, by galactic, by cosmic influences. There have been ice ages, there have been periods of drought and heat many times in the history of the Earth before industrialization. This theory is actually just a Malthusian theory based on the theories of Thomas Malthus, who was a political economics professor at the British East India Company College in the beginning of the 1800s. And Trump, of course, withdrew from the Paris Treaty during his first term. The Biden-Harris administration rejoined the Paris Treaty. That was, I think it took a little while, but they did that. Let's see, February 19, 2021. President Trump has said that he would withdraw once again. And I would just point out that the actual origins of, besides Malthus, of this theory of climate change includes Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who created the World Wildlife Fund, along with Prince Philip of the UK. Prince Bernhard actually was a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party. This was confirmed by the Dutch royal family, reluctantly. I'll give you another example of a person who's involved in this, and that is Hans Joachim Schnellenhuber. He's a German. He's an advisor to the Vatican, but he also became an honorary commander of the British Empire for his theories. He believes that the carrying capacity of the planet Earth is only 1 billion people, and he doesn't explain what to do with the other 6 to 7 billion people. I think we know if you only have a carrying capacity of 1 billion and you want to carry out policies to facilitate that, then you're talking about mass genocide, greater than anything ever seen in human history. Now, American system economists have always opposed Malthus. Friedrich List wrote, "If Malthus's doctrine appears to us in its tendency narrow-minded, it is also in the methods by which it could act an unnatural one, which destroys morality and power, and is simply horrible. This doctrine tends to convert the hearts of men into stones." Henry C. Carey wrote, "To substitute true Christianity for the detestable system known as the Malthusian, it is needed that we prove to the world that it is population that makes food come from the rich soils, and that food tends to increase more rapidly than population, thus vindicating the policy of God to man." Now, one of the things so this is an absolute necessity to debunk this fraudulent climate change theory, reject the Green New Deal, move with manufacturing, industrial activity, higher order forms of energy production like fission and eventually fusion, as opposed to windmills and solar panels and biomass and so forth, which cannot sustain an industrial economy. They just do not have the energy flux density to achieve that. Now, one of the things that President Trump wants to do is to defend the US dollar as the international reserve currency. That's in the Republican platform. And as we've seen, because of the coercive political sanctions brought by the Biden-Harris administration against Russia, among other nations, there has been a move, particularly among the BRICS nations, to de-dollarize. to move away from the dollar as the international reserve currency. And what Trump has said, I'll quote from him. So what we're doing with sanctions is we're forcing everyone away from us. So I don't love sanctions. So I think it is definitely a possibility that Trump will move to remove these coercive sanctions. Sanctions are different than tariffs. Tariffs are legitimate economic measures to protect your own manufacturing capability and to develop that capability. And every nation in the world has the right to and should impose tariffs as that's necessary. Sanctions are completely different. It's a geopolitical, coercive political move, unilateral move. And in this case, it's actually hurt the United States more than Russia. It's actually driven many countries throughout the world away from the United States and away from the US dollar. Now, on the other hand, if we're going to defend the US dollar, it won't be enough just to end coercive sanctions. We have to recognize that the US dollar is not actually as strong as it was previously because of the progressive weakening of the old Bretton Woods system. This began when the Bretton Woods system was hijacked by Churchill and among others after Roosevelt's death, in betrayal of Roosevelt's vision of the Bretton Woods system. Then in 1971, President Nixon took the dollar off the gold reserve standard, introduced floating exchange rates as opposed to fixed exchange rates. And that began the process of globalization, outsourcing, deindustrialization of the United States, and also combined with the green ideology of other formerly industrial nations. So what we have, in my view, is an opportunity to move towards if you want to defend the US dollar, you've got to not only end the coercive sanctions, but you've got to actually move towards the creation of a new Bretton Woods system, which can replace the old Bretton Woods system, which has effectively broken down and has become really an instrument of the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. The IMF imposes very harsh austerity conditions on nations as a precondition for receiving loans. The loans that nations receive under those conditions don't actually go to real production, but they go to refinancing old loans, something which was prohibited in the original Bretton Woods system. And of course, the World Bank, what it does is the only thing it encourages is what they call appropriate technologies. That is not real industry, but appropriate to an underdeveloped nation, i.e. windmills, solar panels, and so forth. And this whole process of destruction of the Bretton Woods system and the introduction of globalization and outsourcing was furthered by two chairmen of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker and Alan Greenspan. Paul Volcker introduced a policy of controlled disintegration of the US economy with usurious interest rates of as much as 20%. Alan Greenspan encouraged the rescinding of Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall legislation, which made a distinction between productive investment and purely speculative investment, and only made it legal to protect productive investment, not speculative investment. So I think we're at a point where we can move towards a new Bretton Woods system if we really want to have a world based upon mutual respect for national sovereignty and also economic development. And I think that there may be an openness on the part of Russia, China, and India at this point. For instance, Putin made it very clear that it was not his intention to move away from the dollar. What he told Tucker Carlson was, quote, as soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power. We had no such intention. It was the decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United States across the world. So I think what we have here is the possibility of moving with a new agreement throughout the planet involving the four powers: United States, Russia, China, and India. And this new system would reject the green ideology. It would support fair and equal reciprocal trade. It would return to fixed exchange rates, respect for national sovereignty, and a commitment to economic development. Now, some look to the BRICS as an alternative, but I would point out that unfortunately, thus far, instead of calling for the creation of a new Bretton Woods system based on FDR's original concept, the BRICS merely call for better representation in the IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organization, thus leaving the Bretton Woods system in place. I have a similar criticism of the idea of a multipolar world, because if you leave the Anglo-Dutch imperial system in place as one of the many poles throughout the world, then you haven't eliminated the actual cause of war. You're still faced with that dilemma. And instead of a multipolar world, what we need is a world which is based upon mutual respect for national sovereignty, the creation of a community of principle among a family of sovereign nations. Now, what the BRICS, if you read their policy statements, unfortunately, they call for defense of the World Trade Organization and its core rules. They call nebulously for reform of the IMF and the World Bank, but the main thing that they advocate is a better representation on the boards of those institutions, which are bankrupt, immoral institutions and need to be replaced. They call for a carbon tax. That everything they write is based upon the Paris Climate Treaty. In fact, all of the BRICS nations, with the exception of Iran, are members of the Paris Treaty, as opposed to the United States under President Trump. So what I would maintain is that the BRICS do not represent a system that is in the true interest of even the BRICS nations. Nor is it a system that the United States should join. There are people who say, "Oh, well, what the United States should do is join the BRICS." But the BRICS suffer from a mental disease associated with their oppressor, the Anglo-Dutch imperial system, which emerged from the British and Dutch East India companies, which, remember, waged two opium wars against China, completely subjugated India, destroyed its industry altogether, forced it to grow opium to send to China, which resulted in genocidal famines. The British East India Company and the British Empire were also involved in attempting to create a great game in Eurasia to isolate Russia, because at one point under Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and also under Tsar Paul I, there was an intention to liberate India from the British East India Company and to return its sovereignty. So these historical lessons need to be remembered, and the BRICS need to reject this system altogether. And what I would propose is that if they realize that this is just a way in which they're being manipulated with these ideologies, they should, instead of asking the United States to join the BRICS, they should encourage the United States, Russia, China, and India to form a committee to initiate a new Bretton Woods system, which will be beneficial to all humanity, in that it will be able to replace the Anglo-Dutch imperial system once and for all. Now, this system must be based upon national banking. Unfortunately, throughout the world, what we have is independent central banks, like the Federal Reserve. I mentioned this earlier, the European Central Bank. All of them are based upon, there was actually an independent central bank in Amsterdam, Netherlands, early on. But then you had the creation of the Bank of England in 1690. This was 2 years after the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when William of Orange, the Netherlands, took over the throne of England. And this was one of the major steps towards the creation of the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. The other was the Treaty of Paris in 1763, which consolidated the British Empire in India and after the 7 Years' War. Now, these independent central banks have to be replaced. The United States had a national banking system, which is not to be confused with the central banking system that's allegedly independent. A national banking system is a banking system which serves the nation. It extends credit for real production, manufacturing, infrastructure. The Federal Reserve extends no credit for real production. They print money to bail out bankrupt banks. They raise and lower interest rates, but they do not extend credit. So we had a national bank under Alexander Hamilton. We had a second national bank. But Andrew Jackson vetoed the rechartering of that bank. Abraham Lincoln, who was a confirmed American system advocate, introduced the greenback policy, where the federal government actually had a sovereign control of the production over the printing of currency to fund the war effort, the industrial activity that was necessary to win the Civil War. But in 1913, the Federal Reserve Bank was created, and that's what we've been stuck with ever since. Roosevelt did something intelligent, which was to bypass it in order to effectively have a national banking system. This was in the form of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and the Export-Import Bank was a subsidiary of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And that combination was able to fund industry, manufacturing infrastructure in the United States. They were also able to fund, I'll give you two examples, major development projects abroad. The Pan American Highway from Alaska to Chile was funded by the Export-Import Bank. How did they do that? Well, they extended credit to U.S. companies to produce the equipment which was necessary to carry out the construction. The Export-Import Bank also financed the Burma Road from Burma into China, 770 miles, in order to provide the necessary war materials to defeat the Japanese militarists at that time. So these are methods; these are examples of what we can do. Now, today there's been a fight that's broken out. President Trump basically said that, in his view, the president of the United States should have some say about the policies of the Federal Reserve. Kamala Harris, of course, like many others, insisted upon the independence of the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, said that if President Trump asked him to resign, that he wouldn't resign. Senator Mike Lee just came out and said the following: the executive branch should be under the direction of the president. That's how the Constitution was designed. The Federal Reserve is one of many examples of how we've deviated from the Constitution in that regard. Yet another reason why we should end the Fed. So what Lyndon LaRouche proposed is that every nation should have a national banking system under its own sovereign control, which can extend low-interest credit for the development of its economy and of its people. And that's what we need in the United States. Friedrich List, the American system economist, at one point said, every sovereign nation must have a, quote, durable system of credit of its own. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about a new Bretton Woods system based on respect for national sovereignty based upon a commitment to make low interest credit available for productive economic projects throughout the world, including the United States. The industrialized nations, including the United States and Europe, must develop and redevelop their manufacturing, because without that, they can't develop their own their own nations, nor can they export the capital goods that the rest of the world needs in order to raise their standard of living and eliminate massive poverty, as President Trump said in a speech before the UN General Assembly in 2017. Now, finally, we also have to be on the forefront of science. One thing that should be said about Prometheus is, again, what he gave man was not just fire in terms of a particular technology, but what he gave man was the fire of creativity. What American system economists call the productive powers of the human mind, or what Friedrich List called the capital of the mind. You invest in the minds of your citizenry. That is how you produce real wealth. That is how you promote the general welfare. Now, Plato, the Greek philosopher, said, he described the Promethean method of thinking. And what he argued is that the Promethean method of thinking is to create an unlimited sequence of limits, or what he calls higher hypotheses. That is, ideas which are increasingly powerful, qualitatively powerful compared to earlier hypotheses or ideas. For instance, at one point, source of fuel was wood. Then we developed coal. Then we developed oil, gas. Then we developed nuclear fission. And we're on the verge of developing nuclear fusion, which is an unlimited source of energy. It's the energy process that goes on in the sun and the stars. So this is what it means to be Promethean. And what we need to do in this new Bretton Woods system is to commit ourselves to what the German scientist who was a pioneer in the US space program, Croft Erika, called man's extraterrestrial imperative. We have an imperative, not just to stay on the earth, but to go throughout the universe, to develop the universe. And that means that we have to have an aggressive space program, like what John F. Kennedy did. We also have to make a commitment to develop fusion power as rapidly as possible. These two go hand in hand because, for instance, one of the best fuels for fusion power is found on the surface of the moon. It's called helium-3. So if we have an aggressive policy to put man back on the moon, then we can begin to mine helium-3 in order to fuel fusion reactors on the Earth, but also fusion can become a much more efficient and effective, powerful form of propellant for space travel, getting us to Mars much more rapidly than any other form of fuel can presently do. So that, in a sense, is our future, to develop the universe, not just to remain here on the Earth. We need to improve man's conditions on the Earth. But as with the original space program of Kennedy, for every dollar invested, there was a return to the civilian economy. So it's not lost effort like a lot of our military spending, and particularly our spending in Ukraine is. But this actually pays off. And it's no accident that the Tavistock Institute, a British institute, actually was very upset about Kennedy's space program because they recognized that program instilled optimism, technological optimism in the American population and in people throughout the world, and this was a threat to their continued control. I can remember back in the early 1980s, I went to Mexico and I visited a collective farm in Mexico. And one of the people I was with was actually shooting off rockets for the children. And you can't imagine the excitement of those children. And that's what we have to bring to the world once again. That is what America can do under President Trump. That is what President Trump can do if he has the support of the American population. So again, rise up. We need to rise up from our slumber. And that's like lions. And remember that we are many and they are few. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Will. That was marvelous.